All right, we're moving into our topic of the day. We're in Proverbs chapter 1, verse 2. To know wisdom and instruction, and to perceive the words of understanding. So now we are in the know instruction part. And if you listen to the last episode, you know that I'm talking about to being open to correction and how much it is needed inside of our lives. The reality is that we have succumbed to addiction repeatedly, and we have relied upon that. And a lot of areas of our life need course correction. And that is that, in our family, faith, fitness, and our finances, that we often go off the course and we need to be course corrected. And so God taking that role inside of our life as an assertive father is super important. So we're talking about enduring that kind of discipline and taking it patiently. And telling yourself, you know what, I must be willing to undergo this process if I want to stay on the path. And because we are stubborn, because we have self-will, because of all these different things, we have a tendency to wander. And that is, if we want to make it to our destination, we're going to have to accept course correction along this path. It's inevitable. It's going to happen. You're going to need to be corrected. And so being open to that is really important. So Hebrews chapter 12, verse 8 says this, but if you are without chastisement, whereof all are partakers, then you are bastards and not sons. Woo! Now that's some deep stuff there. And what he's saying is there, if you are without chastisement, and that is that if you remove yourself from accountability, if you remove yourself from correction and the conviction of God, that you place yourself outside, and that gets the identity of a bastard and not a son. And so understanding this, that the life without boundaries is what we used to have. We used to have a life without boundaries, and that is whatever we want, think, or feel, we did, right? A thought and a pleasure came up and we acted upon it, and we are very impulsive, and we acted upon our sinful natures and all of those things. But what it was a life without boundaries. And if you're familiar with the prodigal son story, how the father had two sons, and the one son before the father died said, can I get my inheritance early? And his father gave in to his request. And he went off and he went away from his father with all the money that he had, and he began to live it up. He began to prostitution, alcohol, all of these different things that took place inside of his life. And so what he wanted was a life without boundaries. And that is the full manifestation of our addiction. We want to live it up. We want to party. We want pleasure. And we want our selfish ways fulfilled. And so he goes out, you know the story, he goes out and begins to live it up and waste all of his father's substance and all this crazy, wild living. And it comes to the point where he's broke. He's destitute, he's busted, right? And he takes a job feeding the pigs, which was unheard of for Jewish men to do. Like, we don't touch pigs, we don't associate. And then he even digs himself further into the pit with saying, you know what, I think I want to eat the slop that the pigs are eating. And so this is a true story of the depths that addiction takes us. Now, it takes us, in different areas of our life, family, faith, fitness, and finance. But whatever it is, in the different areas, it takes us to the pig pen. It takes us to desiring to eat slop. And that is something very nasty, right? And so that's what addiction takes us to. So he comes to his senses, inside of the state and condition, hitting bottom, in that area, and just being disgusted, if you will. And he begins to think to himself, my hired servants at my father's house have it better than this. I'm going to go return to my father. And so as we know, as the story goes, that the father sees him afar off, and he runs to him, and he embraces him, and he kisses him, and he hugs him, and puts a robe on him, and puts a ring on his finger, and the son gets restored back into the family. Now, this is very symbolic of us coming to our senses. And that is us getting a clue that this life of pleasure leads to destitution. It leads to falling short. It leads to mediocre. It leads to the bottom. And once we begin to come to our senses and return to our Father, He is there waiting for us in open arms and to welcome us and to accept us and love us and put the robe back on us and to put a ring on our finger. And what that means is that our position that we have forsaken has been restored and that we now have authority once again. And that is just a powerful example of what begins to take place inside of our lives. And so when he was gone from his father, he lived like a bastard. He basically lived fatherlessness. And he lived to his own pleasure in his own ways. Very symbolic of what takes place with addiction. So Hebrews chapter 12 verse 9 says this, "Furthermore, we have had fathers of our flesh who had corrected us, and we gave them reverence. Shall not we rather be subjection into the Father of spirits and live?" So what's going on here is the writer is talking about natural fathers and how they course correct us and they provide discipline. And he gives that analogy, shall not God do much more? And so we have respect to our fathers who have disciplined us and have corrected us. And maybe you have been fortunate to have a wonderful father. So you have a great model, an example of what God might be. For some of us, we don't really have that example, and we have to really rely on God to provide all of those things for us. But we have reverence and have respect for our natural fathers who have corrected us. And he says much more. Should we not be open to the discipline and the correction of God so we can be subjection unto him and live? So this word subjection, man, that's a hard word and a hard for us to understand. But it simply means to yield to the process. And that God has his ways and his mindset, his belief systems, and he has a way of doing things. And that is that we as his children are going to be subject unto that, is that we are going to submit to the process. God knows the path that leads to life. He knows the way in which we should walk. And being submissive to that path is what is going to get us results. It is what is going to get us into that flow state, if you will, of things beginning to work inside of our marriages, things beginning to work inside of our body, things begin to work inside of our family unit, and things beginning to work inside of our business affairs and our finances. And that is yielding to God in each area of our life. That is powerful, powerful stuff. So Hebrews chapter 12, verse 10 says this, "For they for a few days discipline us after their own pleasure." Now this, he's talking about a natural father again, that they will provide discipline for us for a few days for their own pleasure, right? But he, speaking of God, for our profit, that we might be partakers of his holiness. And so the reality is that the discipline that God provides is for our own benefit. Now, once again, talking about those detrimental fathers that we might have that might have beat us senseless or might have punished us severely. Now, in correlation, they might have done that for their own ego. And the reality is that we all have different personality profiles, and that if we're not getting what we want from our children in that area, then we might be able to, our ego might be attacked, and we might discipline in a very forceful manner because we feel like we have been violated in some way. Now, the most heavy-handed one is the man who must be respected at all times, and that is that I don't care about anything else. All I care about is you respect me. And so anytime their kid steps out of line, it is a symbol of disrespect in their mind, and therefore they come with a heavy hand and punish severely. So we may have had fathers according to the flesh that have done that for their own benefit, for their own ego and such. Now he says that God does this for our own profit. And so if we are are wandering on the path, God's ego is not affected. He is not damaged in any way. Like we think that God like somehow has these insecure emotions and that he is tossed to and fro by the will of man, and that's just not reality. And so the discipline that he provides is for our profit. It means for our good. You know, we may have had fathers who have said, you know, this is going to hurt me more than it hurts you, or this is for your own good. But the reality is that with God, it is true. Absolutely, 100%. It is 100% for our own personal benefit, for the purpose and intention that we might be partakers of his holiness. And I would like to throw this out there is that, you know, we're not going to partake of his holiness if we are unwilling to open ourselves up to the correction and the discipline that God has for us. Now, we look at our lives in the areas that are falling apart, that are mediocre, that don't really, that we're dissatisfied with. And what I can tell you, you can correlate to a lack of discipline in that area. And that is that you're not displaying a lot of self-control in that area. And so we need the discipline and the correction of God to begin to course correct inside of those areas. And that is taking our ego out of it and saying, you know what, I'm open and I am willing. Speak to me, correct me so I can walk on this path of life and not be distracted and not go a different direction. So some fathers punish us because they were disrespected and their ego is damaged, but that doesn't happen with God. Hebrews chapter 12, verse 11. Now, the chastening for the present, no chastening for the present seems to be joyous, but grievous. Nevertheless, afterward it yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness to those that are exercised thereby. So what he's saying is that this kind of correction that we're talking about, especially in the earthly and in the natural, that in no way is it a pleasant experience. Now, I don't find any sort of joy being disciplined or being corrected. That's not what it's about. And so understanding that at the moment, it seems very grievous. And that is if you're corrected in the way that you're behaving inside of your marriage, or if you're corrected in the way that you're behaving inside of your belief system and in your faith. You're corrected in the way that you're behaving inside of your financial life. Maybe you're spending way too much money. Maybe you're not living below your means. Maybe you're trying to keep up with the Joneses, and you're trying to use your financial realm to feed your ego. Now, this is going to come across as very harsh and very rude, but if that is the state and condition that you're in, you need to course correct, because you're going down a path that is not going to lead you to life. Now, you can get very pissed off, right? And this can be very grievous to you, but if you yield to it, it's going to get you the results. Here's what we do, though. We try to avoid anything grievous. And that is anything that causes us discomfort, anything that challenges our belief system, anything that strikes our ego. We have a tendency to run from and we resist. And the reality is that we're running from the very thing that is going to bring us life. Like I talked about in a previous episode, there is no pleasure without pain. And everything that you want is through pain. And we avoid the discomfort and we avoid the grievousness because we don't want to face that. But the challenge and the difficulty is the path. It is through the pain, it is through the grievousness that we get to the other side. And we're not willing to walk on that path because maybe it hurts too much. Maybe we're unwilling to be honest about some of our shortcomings. And so what do? We bury our heads in Jesus and we see how good he is, and we pick up all this religious talk and we go to church and we pretend. But what we do is we're building up a wall and a facade that can't be penetrated. We put on our happy face and we say all the positive words, but inside we're unwilling to deal with the stuff that is producing all this nasty fruit in our lives. But we go on pretending that we're okay. And that's not the place that you want to be. So it's not a joyous experience. But if we endure the process afterwards, it will begin to yield the produce of righteousness and holiness if we yield to the process. So Proverbs chapter 2:1, to know wisdom and instruction, to perceive the words of understanding. So what I want to talk about here is perceiving the word. And that is that we begin to grasp and understand what God is speaking to us. Now, if any time you would like to hear God speak, I would encourage you to open your Bible. Now, we are as close to God as we want to be. And God does not need to move any closer to us. What we need to do is begin to open up His Word and begin to read it and begin to comprehend what God might speak to you. And begin to ask yourself after you read, what is God saying to me through this? And what is the application that I can apply today so I can begin to manifest His results inside of my life? That is a powerful reality. So to perceive the words of understanding, we're finally moving forward. Now this word perceive is to see, grasp, and understand, right? When it's talking about the word, though, it's talking about separating it mentally. And that is that we can begin to discern what God is saying, and we begin to consider what He is saying. Now, this is what I thoroughly believe. If you read the word, that means what it means. But the application could be far different. And that is, I could read something and you could read something. And it can tell me that I need to change something in my financial life, and it can tell you that you need to change something in your marriage. And so the reality is that when we read, we need to understand what it means, but then go a step further and ask ourselves, what does it mean to me, and what is my application for this? After I stop reading this, what action steps do I need to take to make this applicable? Now that is really separating and concerning it. So God tells us to regard the word and to think about it. To think about it. But he says here in verse 3 of Proverbs, to receive the instruction of wisdom. So after we begin to see and understand and to separate the word mentally, what does it mean and how is it applicable to me right now today, that we begin to receive it. And if you're watching me my video, I'm going to show you what receiving is. And it's just simply to open your arms out and to welcome it and to accept it. And you're saying, I receive, I welcome, and I accept. What does that mean? I'm open. When you receive somebody into your house, what do? You open the door and you allow them to come in. If you're a supervisor at work and you got an open door policy, what does that mean? It means the door is open. And so this idea of openness to instruction is having that I'm welcoming it and I will accept it. Now this is very hard for some people because they will not welcome any form of challenging to their beliefs. They will not welcome any form of criticism, positive, constructive criticism that might come to their behavior. And what that means is that they are not open. They are refusing to let wisdom come in. I've talked about this in a previous episode, but Jesus stands outside of the door and He knocks. And He is requesting entrance. And so we have to ask ourselves, are we going to welcome Him in? Are we going to allow wisdom access to our hearts and to our minds? Am I going to be open to discipline and course correction? Now, this is a very foundational principle that as we go through the book of Proverbs, we're going to have to open ourselves up to be corrected so we can stay on the path of life. So where in your life, family, faith, fitness, and finances, are you closed? And that is, you think you got it all figured out. You think you got your marriage figured out. You think you have your faith figured out. You think you have everything figured out with your body that you need to figure out. And you think that you got your finances figured out. And what that means is that since you got it all handled, since you know it all, And you're no longer open to any form of discipline and correction in that area. And so I would go so far to say the area that is frustrating us the most is the area that we're not open to God communicating into that area of our life so we can grow and expand. Challenge today. Look at your life. Where are you closed? Where are you not open? And ask yourself, are you going to begin to allow wisdom and instruction and Jesus to come inside? I'll see you later.